presented by the Professional Independent Insurance Agents of Ohio. We're going to talk today, and in 3 other hours worth of seminar, about preparing your clients for disaster. Nobody wants to think about it, but that's what we have to do to be really good insurance agents and insurance professionals. My name is Jackie Reindl. I'm a member of the National Faculty of CIC. I also do CISR courses, E&O, ethics, and various other continuing education and non-continuing education courses. As you can tell, I like to speak, and today we get to talk a lot about disaster preparedness. The objective of the webinar is to make you, the agent, aware of the problems associated with a disaster in a small business environment, how to prepare a plan of action to share with clients, and ways to respond following a disaster. While the primary focus is going to be on preparing your clients, every now and then we'll throw in something about how you as an agency should prepare for disasters as well. So today we're going to focus on what is a disaster and how it impacts small businesses. Why small businesses versus large businesses? For a variety of reasons. Number one, big businesses can typically take care of themselves. They have the capital resources. They have the operational profits set aside. In fact, many of them have listened to the experts that say that they should have 10 to 25% of their operational profits set aside for potential disasters. Now, a small business, on the other hand, they have limited capital. They're more likely to use external financing for operations, which means loans and such, and that's going to lead to an outflow of resources rather than inflow of resources when needed, or even having resources on hand when they're needed. Another big difference between large businesses and small businesses are the assets, physical items. The large business very often has multiple locations, so if something is destroyed at one location, they can simply get a replacement from another location, if not move to the other location entirely. The small business, on the other hand, very often only has one location, so if the assets are damaged, they're going to be prohibited from continuing operations. So that's a huge difference between large and small, and that's where the agent can come in handy. Another difference between big businesses and small businesses are personnel. The large business obviously has more people working for it, and so they have more options. Many of them may work from home, or they may have another facility where personnel can go to. The small business, on the other hand, simply doesn't have the hands that are enough to help recover. If the owner of a small business is injured or unable to work, that may take the business down entirely. Whereas with a large business, if the owner or the CEO is injured or unable to work, there are multiple other groups of people, vice presidents, other operating officers, that can continue the operations. So let's talk about what actually is a disaster. You and I can probably think of 1,000 things that might be disasters, but there's actually a formal definition here. It's called a sudden event, like an accident or a natural catastrophe that causes damage and or loss of life. It's also a serious disruption of the functioning of a community or a society, which of course our businesses are part of the community and the society, involving widespread human, material, economic, or environmental losses and impacts, which exceeds the ability of the affected community or society or business to cope using its own resources. Outside help is going to be needed. Other words that we sometimes think of with disaster is calamity, catastrophe, or tragedy. Any of those can be interchangeable. They all pretty much mean the same thing to us. When it happens, it's devastating. So we're going to take a look at what a small business is prepared for and what they need to prepare for. So how does a disaster impact a small business? Well, according to Business News Daily, 74%, 3/4 of small businesses do not have a recovery plan. When I went looking on the internet for information and ideas about how to present this webinar, I was astonished at the information out there that's available to everyone for recovery plans. There are templates, there are checklists, there are government ideas, there are private ideas. You can get them for free. You can pay thousands of dollars for a recovery plan. And yet almost 3/4 of small businesses don't have a recovery plan at all. I'm hoping your insurance agency does as you're listening to this, because this 3/4 of your clients are going to be relying on you to help them recover. 84% of small businesses do not have natural disaster insurance. Now we could be talking about earthquake, we could be talking about flood, we could be talking about sinkholes. A variety of natural disasters will occur, and 84% of small businesses, potentially your clients, don't have the insurance necessary to help them recover. 71% don't have a backup generator in case of power outage. I'm sure you've seen the news reports whenever a tornado comes through, flood, any kind of disaster comes through. There is a rush to all kinds of small and large hardware stores, big box stores, looking for generators. And that, of course, is the worst possible time to be looking for a backup generator. The ideal time is before it's needed. Cost is probably going to be less before it's needed as well, because even though price gouging is against the law in every state, businesses are businesses and a profit is a profit. So obviously the best time to get a backup generator is before you need one. And then cross your fingers and hope you never need it. Small businesses lose an average of $3,000 per day after closing due to a major storm. Now, $3,000 may not seem like much, but for a small business, it can pack quite a wallop, particularly if we're going on for more than a few days. And some major storms have put businesses down for several weeks. That $3,000 per day starts adding up very, very quickly. So all of these, according to Business News Daily, are important statistics to understand when we're dealing with small businesses and your clients. How do disasters affect people otherwise? How do they affect businesses otherwise? Let's look at the inconvenience factor. If I'm used to going to the same dry cleaners all the time, if I'm used to going to the same market all the time and suddenly it's not there, that's a major inconvenience for me. As a customer, inconvenience can lead to a change of routine, which means that I, as your customer, won't be returning because I've found a replacement for you. That's not the kind of effect you want coming out of a disaster, because that amount that we're losing every day can then multiply depending on how long customers are inconvenienced. So we don't want our customers inconvenienced, or as little as possible, certainly. It's an inconvenience for the business. Not only may the business be affected by any kind of disaster, their vendors might be impacted. Some of their large customers may be impacted by the same disaster. And so for the business, we have the inconvenience of trying to find new suppliers, trying to reassure our customers that we will be okay so that they will be all right. So the inconvenience chain just keeps rolling. For personnel, for our employees, the inconvenience is, number one, I'm out of my routine. I'm used to getting up at a certain time. I'm used to being at a certain place. I'm used to doing certain things every day at work. Not being able to do that initially is an inconvenience. As the inconvenience moves on, it can become more psychologically damaging. So the inconvenience is a factor that initially we can shrug off and go, all right, so what? But if the inconvenience continues, it becomes a major deal for customers, for business, for personnel. What other impacts? How long does it take you to recover from a disaster? Well, some businesses say, 33% say that it'll only take a week to recover. And this is from any kind of disaster. Whatever happens, I can be up and running in a week. That doesn't sound too bad. If 1/3 of your clients can get up and running within a week, then that's manageable. The business can assure their customers that life will go on normally very soon, and the economic impact is not going to be too bad. 16% of small businesses say it'll be 2 weeks. Now we're starting to run into a little time, but it's only 16%, so that's not too bad. But again, 2 weeks times the $3,000 a day average. Now the inconvenience factor is starting to come into play because I'm now out of normal for more than a week, for 2 weeks. And so I may have to create, as your customer, as your employee, a new normal. As a vendor, as the recipient of your business, as someone who works with your business, I may have to create a new normal. 2 weeks can be an eternity. 14% of small businesses say it's going to take more than a month. So if you add the 2 weeks in a month, that's almost another third of the businesses say they're going to be out for a while. And now the inconvenience factor becomes very serious. Now I will have to find other ways to take care of my needs as a customer. If I'm your business partner across the country, I'm probably going to have to find another way to deal with my issues. I can feel sympathy for yours as a small business, but as another business, I have to look out for my own as well. The number that is scary is 37% of small businesses have no idea how long it's going to take to recover from a disaster. So you can probably figure that a large percent of that 37% are not going to recover because that becomes apparent that they have not done any risk management, have not identified any problems, have not figured out how they're going to take care of the funding of any issues that may arise from a disaster. They have not planned. They have nothing in place should something happen. So that's 37% is probably on the way to extinction if we, as their insurance agent, do not help them plan and prepare. And that's what we're going to try to get ready to do. Now there's some good news out of this. 62% of businesses surveyed said they could operate their business via mobile devices. Technology is so cool. I can now run my business from my smartphone. That's terrific. But notice only 62% say they can do that. That if I have a smartphone, if I have a laptop, my stuff's in the cloud, say 30%, my stuff's stored somewhere else, life is good. But is 30% good for those who say they store their information in the cloud? What's the other 70% doing? Are they hopefully at least storing information off-site? I do remember the days, and that gives away age, I do remember the days when we did our backups and then put the backups in the drawer right next to the computer. Fortunately, most people have gotten smarter than that, so most do have at least off-site storage for their backups. However, the cloud is good, and this is information that can be passed along to your clients. This percentage has to be increased. This is not good enough. But that's a little bit of good news out of small businesses after some very troubling statistics on those not prepared. Another effect of disasters, curiosity. First we had inconvenience, now we have curiosity. So why is curiosity a problem? Well, the human reaction of curiosity, you've probably heard the term of rubbernecking. That will impact not only society around the business that's damaged, it's also going to impact clients, it's going to impact agency personnel. If you don't believe me, just step outside for a moment, look up, and see how long it takes for somebody else to come along and look up too. Because they're kind of figuring, what are you looking at? There must be something going on. That's the psychology of rubbernecking. Basically what we're doing is trying to figure out what's going on when something happened. And if something happened to not us, then we get into the comparison mode of trying to compare our own circumstances to what happened to someone else, and there's a little bit of gratitude, there's a little bit of guilt because we're feeling that gratitude. Think of the small business who's been impacted by a disaster. They have to deal with the curiosity of others and the curiosity of their own employees. My curiosity as an employee of a small business hit by a disaster is going to be, how bad is it? Do I still have a job? Are they still going to pay me? The owner is curious as to if any other businesses that he deals with have been impacted. The professional reaction, as an agent, I know you felt this reaction. When you hear about an accident or an explosion or a tornado going through a neighborhood, your first reaction is that one of mine? That's human, and it's professional. Another professional impact of curiosity is, all right, it's happened, what's going to happen to the business? It becomes less of a human and more of an economic or professional reaction. So curiosity can hold people in place for a little bit, because we all like to talk about things when bad things happen. Again, there's the gratitude it didn't happen to us, and there's the guilt associated with it, but mainly it's just, let's talk this out. Maybe it'll make it better. Maybe it'll make it go away. But curiosity is an impact that we have to address when we're dealing with clients. It can slow things down on getting recovery moving. Another thing that we have to work with is denial. Reaction to bad news most often is no. It didn't happen, it couldn't happen, I don't believe it happened. And we all want to think that no matter what bad things can happen in the world, it's not going to happen here. Never has, never will. Unfortunately, sometimes it does. And this is a defense mechanism, quite frankly, and what we're trying to tell ourselves is, that's a painful reality I refuse to acknowledge. So if I don't think about it, if I don't acknowledge it, it didn't happen. Unfortunately, it does. And denial also has the effect, again, of freezing us in place and stopping us from dealing with the reality of what has to be done next. As an agent, you have to be prepared to deal with your clients' denial of what happened. So there's curiosity, there's denial. The next effect of a disaster is naturally going to be panic. It did happen. Now what are we going to do? That's the human reaction. That's the professional reaction. Human reaction is, oh my gosh, anxiety, stress, physical manifestation of that panic and stress can, again, freeze a person in place. It will manifest itself in impaired functioning, lack of focus, confusion, all kinds of mental reactions that are detrimental to recovery, but they're there and they have to be dealt with. On a professional basis, the owner of the business may stand amid the rubble of his business and go, what's the point? I built this from scratch. Look what happened in an instant. And panic will set in, and at that moment, the insurance agent professional can be the best friend they ever had, because if we have helped our clients be prepared, then we also have helped them be ready to move on to the next step, which is going to be recovery. So that's the kind of thing that we have to deal with initially. And it's human reactions, professional reactions that are real and must be dealt with before we can move on to the next step. All right, so where did the catastrophe happen? And is it going to have an impact on how I, as a small business owner, react? Absolutely. Absolutely. If this catastrophe, if this tragedy happened across the country, first I'm going to feel relief that it wasn't me. Second, I have a longer bit of time to figure out if it's going to impact me. And if so, how? And because I'm not in the middle of the disaster, then I have time to breathe and take the steps necessary to see how I'm affected by that tragedy across the country and deal with ramifications. If it's right next to me or in the same neighborhood, then I have less time to react, and I have less time to get through those human reactions with the help of my insurance agent, of course, to get to, all right, what does that mean for me? If it's my business, obviously, I need help right away. I don't have time to breathe and time to figure out what the next steps are. I'm just going to have to take the next steps. How I'm impacted is also going to be, what's my relationship with other businesses? Are we friendly? Do we have reciprocal agreements in place? So if my business is destroyed, I can set up shop with his. Agents, it's a lot like we suggest you do with other insurance agencies. If you're a one location agency, then it's really important that you have a reciprocal agreement with another agency so that you or they can use each other's facilities if it becomes necessary. Businesses other than insurance also need to set up some kind of agreement with other businesses in the area that if my business is standing, you can use part of my space. You can use it at night. You can use it when I'm not needing it, or we'll share. But there has to be a determination of how is this small business working with other businesses pre-tragedy so that we have it set in place for post-tragedy. Agents, you also need to take a look at what is your relationship with your carriers, with your insurance carriers. Do you have the information necessary so that you can continue if it's your business that's down? You have all the information from carriers on how they're going to proceed and what procedures are in place should you go down and who to contact. A relationship to other business locations. If your small business is more than one location, this is terrific, because now what we can do is take as many assets as possible from the damaged location to another location. We can move our personnel to our other location. Everything is transferable as much as possible. It will work if there is a plan in place. If nobody knows what to do after a catastrophe or after a tragedy, then we have a problem. But the planning is key. You will hear that many times during this webinar. There's different kinds of disasters. Most of us think about the weather disasters, the fires, the tornadoes, the ice and snow. However, there can be a business type disaster. This can be one where the building is damaged by other than weather-related incidences like accidents. We can have personal disasters, whether it's talking about the owner or key employees. We can have weather-related disasters like we all dread because it puts our agency on high alert when our small businesses suffer weather-related tragedies. We're going to deal with a lot of those as we go through the webinar. Let's take them one at a time. Let's look at weather or natural types of disasters. Wind. What can wind do to a building? Wind, whether it's a hurricane, tornado, straight line winds, or just severe gusts, can take off a roof, can tear a sign down, can blow out windows, can knock down a building. So wind is something we have to be prepared for. Where's our physical assets? Are they all in one place? Where's our cyber assets? Have we backed them up properly? What happens if wind picks up our small business and moves it across town? How are we going to prepare for that? Look at flood. One of the problems with flood is it can do the same thing that wind does. However, typically wind is going to be covered under the insurance policy you sell your clients. Flood is another issue. Flood is sometimes hard to sell unless the mortgagee is demanding it, because flood is not something that is required on all policies. It's excluded. Every business, every location is not in a proper flood zone, and therefore it's harder to talk people into it until after they're underwater. Flood is often underfunded because there's a maximum amount available through flood insurance. It's often underfunded because your client will think, well, we're not in a flood zone. It's not going to happen here. We have never had a flood. Unfortunately, flood is just not happening because you live next to a river or your business is next to a river. Floods happen all the time from outside sources, and that's something that we have to convince our clients of, that flood is any kind of water from any outside source. So funding becomes critical, or setting aside money, even if we don't think we're in a flood zone. Ice and snow, plenty of that this winter. Ice and snow can cause a building to collapse, can create havoc later after the damage is finally seen, after the thaw, because it can create leaks that show up later, not now. Ice and snow can create a lack of business. If you have a community that's suffering under 6 feet of snow in 2 weeks, that community is not going to be very likely to come out and support a business. They're more concerned with their own survival. So ice and snow can cause physical damage. It can also cause economic damage. Earth movement. Well, I'm not in a... There's no plates near me that are going to be shifting. Your client may go, there's no earthquake fault anywhere near me. Unfortunately, it's not just natural earth movement we have to deal with. There can be fracking, other kinds of drilling. There can be blasting that causes earth movement. And the client may be unaware that natural or man-made earth movement is excluded from most insurance policies. And so our job as agents is to remind them that there are other kinds of earth movement, that we do have to take care of this, and convincing the client becomes paramount. Fire. Probably one of the most feared kinds of disasters because it just happens so quickly and can be so devastating. It's fearful. The problem with fire is the extent of the disaster quite often depends on the extent of the fire. A small fire, put it out, damage is minimal from the fire, but we have follow-up damage from water. Mold can develop within 24 to 48 hours after water is put on a fire. So we have the fire damage to clean up, we have the water damage to clean up, we have may have mold to clean up. A large fire can take a building to the ground. And then you still have the same issues, but you can add another one with a large fire because now you may have looting or theft that's thrown into the mix. So fire in and of itself is bad enough. Consequences of fire are more severe because it leads to other kinds of disasters. Terrorism. While we may think of terrorism on a large scale, the way terrorism works in our world now can be a one-person event. You could have that one individual who has firm beliefs we don't agree with, but firm beliefs, and feel it's their obligation to create as much damage where they are instead of traveling across the world to create it. You may hear of terrorists who think it's a great idea to go into public places like malls or business centers or hotels and create as much destruction and or death as possible. So terrorism is no longer necessarily the large-scale event that we have come to expect in the past. Terrorism on a smaller scale can be devastating to small businesses, to people and small businesses. Electrical outage. What would we do without power? The issue with power is not just the lights, not just the water, just not utilities. It's communications. Almost everything we do now is by phone, text, email. Power is required for all of them. If we're not prepared, you can go back to that backup generator. If we're not prepared with alternate sources of power, alternate ways to keep our phones charged, alternate ways to keep our laptops and other computers charged, then it can be devastating for a business. And an electrical outage doesn't necessarily need to wait for a natural disaster. Ice and snow can obviously lead to electrical outage. Fire can lead to electrical outages, but electric can go out at any time. And depending on how long it's out, can devastate a business. Think of a business with perishable goods. And if they don't have a backup plan for electrical outage, then the business can be devastated. These are just some of them, natural disasters. Look at computer malfunction. Where would you be right now without a computer? Where would I be without a computer? Most businesses, even the smallest of businesses, have gone to electronic power, to electronic manufacturing, to needing electronics and computers for every aspect of their business. There are the few that have not, but they are quickly going the way of the dinosaur. So a computer malfunction, whether we're talking about malware, viruses, hacking, it doesn't matter. Computer malfunction can put us out of business for a short time or a long time. The cyber threats becoming everyday occurrences now. So much in the news that they hardly even register anymore. We just know that they're happening, and thank goodness it's not happening to us. Speaking of which, vandalism and theft. It's fun now, apparently, to get into your computer and create havoc. It's fun to get in and steal your data, your confidential information. It used to be we would go into a place and steal physical assets. Those don't go for nearly as much money. If we have your confidential information, we can actually hold it for ransom. That's even better than holding a person for ransom. So vandalism and theft, while still here, have taken on a different turn. And there are ways to prevent it. There are ways to take care of it. There are ways to repair it and recover it. And that's what we will discuss as we go through here. Accidents, a car coming through your wall, a train derailing near your business, and everybody has to be evacuated. What's on the train depends on how long you're going to have to be evacuated. Heaven forbid the train derails and catches fire. It's happened very recently. There's more and more, for example, oil being transported by rail, and it can be very nasty when that kind of train derails. And we have to pay attention, both for our sake and for our client's sake, as to what is the response should something like that happen anywhere near us. Personal disasters. Personal disasters are very often overlooked. We have, for example, with personal disasters, let's take the key employee. Key employee. First of all, who is it? While we all like to think that we're important, there are some of us more important than others when it comes to the owner of the business. A key employee is one critical to the functioning of the business. It can be a salesperson, it could be a CFO, it could be an accountant, could be a manager. It doesn't matter. Each business is going to make their own definition of who is a key employee, and that person or persons has to be identified very early in disaster planning. A couple of things that we have to take into consideration when we're talking about a key employee is what would happen if they were gone? Now, why would they be gone? They could quit. They could be fired. They could become disabled. They could die. One of the things we all do, and sometimes it's just an unconscious defense mechanism, kind of job security, is that we often say a lot of what we do and know is in our head. So what happens if the key employee keeps a lot of information in their head and quits, is fired, becomes disabled, or dies? That information is lost. Now, if the employee quits or is fired, was it amicable? Was it a mutual agreement? Were there any contracts signed to prevent theft of proprietary information, theft of clients, whatever? If there is not that kind of agreement in place, what information were they able to take with them? If you have a disgruntled employee who is no longer with you and they had information, you could lose clients, you could lose a significant amount of business. If they die, you could lose the information that they kept in their head. So the question, after you identify and kind of figure out what they know, is how long is it going to take to return to normal after the loss of a key employee, regardless of how the loss happens? How long to return to normal? And the thing to consider, since we're mainly talking about small businesses, is the fewer employees in a business, the more vulnerable the business is to the loss of a key employee. You just don't have backups for key employees like you would in a larger business. So one of the things that we can take into account and do to help the small business is encourage them to have an operations manual. If there are procedures in place, how things are done, then the sudden loss of a key employee is not going to leave the business so vulnerable or in such a critical condition, because you can return to normal faster because you can bring someone else up to speed more quickly. Is there a job description? Very often in small businesses, everybody does everything to an extent. But there's really no written job description, so if a key employee suddenly leaves for whatever reason, nobody else knows exactly how to do that job or do the functions that were so critical to the success and continuation of the business. So operations manual, job description, cross-training. Sometimes with a key employee, you want to stay a key employee, and if somebody else knows how to do your job, then maybe you're not so key after all. So it's up to the owner of the small business to be encouraged to consider cross-training, even and especially of a key employee, so that someone else can step in and do the majority of the functions of that key employee, because this is not about the key employee. This is about the survival and recovery of the business in the case of the loss of a key employee. A business almost always has to plan for the worst. What could possibly happen? So you plan for the worst, hope for the best, and if a key employee is lost, then we have a backup plan. What about death or disability of a business owner or principal? For example, in the case of an agency, in the case of a small business, is there a perpetuation plan in place? Should the owner of a business suddenly die, now that we're talking about a small business, or become disabled and unable to participate in the small business, what's the plan? Is someone else ready or prepared or trained to take over, to come in and do the job as owner until the owner can return if they're going to? Is their family interested or involved? Is the business owner's family prepared? Very often they might be interested because, after all, their survival depends on the survival of the business, and so they may want to become involved. But unprepared is worse than no involvement at all. So is the family interested, involved, and prepared? Is there an employee that's been trained to step in and take over, at least temporarily? That might be the key employee, though quite frankly, if the key employee steps into the shoes, at least temporarily, of the business owner, then we have to take into account that now we've lost the function of that key employee. So it goes back to job description, operations manual, and cross-training. So if there's an employee stepping in, the loss of that employee and their position for a short time then has to be considered. Is there a selling plan in place? Is there insurance in place, like cross-purchase, buy-sell, so that the business can continue with only the smallest of hiccups? All of this has to be considered, and though nobody ever wants to consider the death or disability of anybody in the business, we'd all like to think we're going to go on forever. However, we don't. And the personal disasters, unplanned, unprepared, can lead to the utter destruction or devastation of a business just as surely as a tornado can. So those things really do have to be taken into account. So, what are the impact of disasters? There's a lot of impacts. Disasters can physically wreck the plant, the physical plant of a business. What else can it do? It can take a physical and mental toll on everybody involved in the business. The physical reaction probably is going to come from the mental reaction. At least we hope so. We don't want anybody actually injured by the disaster. The mental reaction can be devastating. We go through all the processes, as we talked earlier, about curiosity, about denial, about panic. Once we get past that, then we're in the dealing stage of this mess. And the dealing stage is a matter of gathering oneself and getting rid of all the distractions. Unfortunately, most of us can't do that. So we're going to have a mental struggle every day that we're looking at what happened to the business. And if employees are also dealing with a mess at home from the same disaster, then it's going to be even worse. And so the business has to be prepared to deal with the mental reaction of confusion, lack of focus, lack of direction. All that's going to be feeling and dealt with by employees. And it's up to the owner of the business to be able to coalesce the employees, gather them back in a group that's going to be for the benefit of the business and for the employees, because most employees do better when they have something to do. The problem is, with a small business, that number of employees may not be enough. And dealing with both the physical and mental reaction, the physical reaction that stress can bring on, may be more than the business owner is prepared to deal with. And again, this is where the preparation checklist and having the resources at the ready can help the business recover by helping the employees recover. The duration of the disaster, of the impact of the disaster, is going to have a major, major impact here. Is this only going to be for one day? You get the sudden snowstorm, causes a lot of grief, but hey, I'm back open the next day. That's not a major deal. That's going to require maybe a little inconvenience, but probably not going to lead to the panic and denial stages. But if this one day turns into 2 weeks, turns into 6 months, then the impact is going to be very economical, going to be very physical, going to be very mental. The economic impact is going to show up initially, level out, and then over a period of time, jump curve again. The long-term effects of a disaster are really interesting both from an economic and psychological standpoint. Economic depends on how well you were prepared. Have you as the agency prepared the client with not just insurance, but preparation, prevention, checklists, all the help that they may need to recover? If so, 1 day to 6 months, impact economically is going to be minimal. Now, the impact mentally can last much longer, and that in turn can have an impact economically. The long-term effects from a disaster in many ways mimic PTSD. If, for example, a truck barrels through the wall of your building, anytime after that, for quite some time, any loud noise may trigger the memory of that initial impact and can create then physical reactions. You may have overcompensation. If, for example, there was a riot and there was looting and theft, overcompensation might be too much security so that your customers feel uncomfortable coming to the small business. Too many bars, too many security guards can be off-putting to customers. So we can go PTSD, we can go overcompensation. There can be fear that it could happen again. Even if it's a 100-year flood, which we know, of course, happens more often than 100 years, but if we are impacted by a disaster, the fear that it's going to happen again can have a long-term effect on your employees and on the business itself, because we're looking always backwards instead of forwards. Economically, the long-term effects are going to vary depending on the business itself. If you have long-term contracts that have had to be canceled or renegotiated, that can have a long-term economic impact. 2 or 3 days, you can probably recover pretty quickly. But if you're out for a longer period of time, it's going to take correspondingly a longer time to recover from the economic devastation initially. There are a lot of different things that we as agents are going to be able to do to take care to help our clients prepare and get ready for this. That's what we're going to discuss in the next few webinars. Like I said, everything over the internet, it's out there. What we've tried to do, what the PIIA of Ohio has tried to do, is put together in one place the tools that you as the insurance agent are going to need and use to help your clients. One of the things I found, because I was curious, what kind of kit do I need to have available in case of disaster? And since tornado season is going to be coming, I know it's hard to believe, but tornado season may be coming any day now. There's been some news lately about what kind of things you should have in your business. So I went on, I made a list, and then I looked up some things. Here's a gift idea, agents, if your state allows you to provide gifts to your clients. If not, here's a suggestion for you to make to your clients as to what they might want to have on hand. How about a bucket with things like water and water purification tablets? How about gloves? Because I know, should a business go down and all the debris, there are things I'm probably not going to want to touch. You might want to suggest dust masks so that if your client has to go back in and help clean up their own mess, or employees have to clean up their own mess, then they're not going to be exposed to whatever might be in the air. A lot of buildings, for example, still have asbestos. Several old buildings have lead paint in them. Mold will develop within 24 to 48 hours. I would rather not be breathing that, and nor would my employees. So that's the kind of thing that you might consider suggesting to your client if you're not able to provide them. How about pry bars in order to get doors or files open so that you can recover what you need to? Electronics and technology is wonderful, but what about if the electricity or power goes out? What about mobile phone chargers? How about light sticks? Batteries and flashlights are always a good idea. What about tarps? If there's an opening to the building, all the tarps in all the hardware stores are going to be gone within hours. If the business can provide their own, they're way ahead. Agents, a couple things that you might consider, and this is old school, but if you do not have access to power, you may actually have to type. You might need paper. You might need pens. And you might even need something called carbon paper, because access to a photocopier might not be handy. So there's all kinds of things. Oh, by the way, agents, another thing is good cameras, so that you can help your clients by getting their pictures taken as quickly as possible. There's all kinds of tools that we're going to talk about to prepare. One of the things that people often forget is that kit that's necessary for immediate recovery after the fact. So things to consider while we're doing and preparing for our clients and preparing ourselves. The biggest thing to remember, though, is that our clients are going to need us, both for insurance, but for prevention through risk management techniques. They're going to need us after the fact to help them recover, both physically, plant, assets, and psychologically. The Red Cross has a lot of information available. Yes, they may be there after the fact, but you may need help before they get there. The Small Business Administration has tons of information available for you as the client. The agency itself, if you want to contact your trade association, they have checklists, they have templates, they have materials that you can provide to your clients so that you as the agency are prepared. I think it's rather amusing that we as agents sometimes forget ourselves in our zeal to help our clients. And if we're not prepared, they're not going to be prepared. Have you as the agent prepared your emergency checklist, your disaster preparedness plan? If I were your client, I would ask to see yours. So by the end of this webinar series, what we're hoping for is that you as the agent are more prepared than your client. Any of the information provided for small businesses also applies to agencies, whether you're a one location or multi-location facility. Who in your office runs drills? Who in your office is the center post for after disaster? If I'm your client and you can't answer these questions, I'm probably not going to want to listen to you very much, because it's a case of I want to see what you're doing so that I know if it works for me. Have you as an agency had a disaster that you did recover from and that you can use as an example for your clients? Has your agency had a fire? Have you had to start from scratch? If so, that's going to be part of your story when you're selling this information to your clients. If you have been able to recover, they know they will be able to recover. That's another human reaction. oh good, they did it, so can I. So agents, what have you got available for your clients as a means of, yes, we did this, or no, I haven't been through it, but I know somebody who has, and here's how we did it, here's how they did it, here's how you can do it too. This information that you're going to have by the end of this webinar series is a really good promotional material. It can be used to sell your agency. It can be used as one of the wow factors for your agency, because every agency always talks about what they have. This is a solid, concrete way of saying we are ready to help you, our client, get through the worst of times. We only want the best of times for you. We've sold you the insurance you need. Here's what else you need, because money is not going to take care of everything that happens after a disaster. And as the insurance agent, it's our job to help our clients recover physically and all other ways. Money is good. The support emotionally, the support that I've been there, I've been through this, I know what you're going through, the empathy is critical to recovery. Then bring the money, that's the fun part, that's the good part. I helped you. But everything else has to tie in with helping your clients prepare for, prevent if possible, and absolutely recover from a disaster. That concludes part 1 of our webinar. Hope to see you back here for the other 3 parts. Have a good day.